You know that feeling when your car makes a weird noise, or your phone screen cracks, or a medical bill shows up out of nowhere, and your stomach just drops before you've even seen the price. That instant wave of dread isn't really about the money. It's about not having any buffer between you and disaster. There's a surprisingly small amount of money that makes that feeling almost completely disappear, and it's nowhere near what most people assume. Most financial advice tells you that you need 6 months of expenses saved before you can feel any real sense of security. But here's the thing they're missing. There's a much smaller number that creates most of that psychological relief long before you're anywhere close to 6 months. And once you hit it, unexpected expenses stop feeling like emergencies. That number is $1,000. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, financial psychology, and why some people stay calm when life throws a curveball while others spiral into panic over a single unexpected bill. If you want to understand the real mechanics behind financial stress instead of just being told to save more, hit subscribe. And give this video a thumbs up if it changes how you think about your first savings goal. Now, before we get into why $1,000 matters so much, let me ask you something. When you picture someone who's financially stressed, what comes to mind? Maybe someone who's deep in debt with maxed-out credit cards, or someone barely scraping by paycheck to paycheck with nothing saved at all. Here's what's surprising. You don't need to be in either of those extreme situations to feel that constant low-grade dread. Most people who feel financially anxious aren't broke in the dramatic sense. They just don't have a buffer, and that absence of a buffer is doing almost all of the psychological damage. Think of it like walking a tightrope with no net underneath versus walking the exact same tightrope with a net a few feet below. The tightrope itself hasn't changed. Your actual skill and balance haven't changed. But your nervous system behaves completely differently, depending on whether that net exists. $1,000 in savings is that net. It doesn't make life's problems disappear. It just means one wrong step doesn't have to be catastrophic. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. And this part is backed by real research, not just a motivational metaphor. A study from Vanguard, examining the financial well-being of thousands of people, found that having just $2,000 in emergency savings increased a person's measured financial well-being by 21%. Not doubling their income, not paying off all their debt, just having $2,000 sitting untouched in an account. And the effect wasn't gradual either. It showed up as a sharp jump, almost like crossing a threshold rather than climbing a smooth hill. What's even more telling is what happened after that. As people continued adding more savings beyond that initial buffer, working their way up toward a full 3 to 6 months of expenses, the additional boost to their well-being was real but far smaller in comparison, something in the range of another 13%. In other words, the very first sliver of savings did more for how people felt than most of what came after it. The first $1,000 to $2,000 isn't just a small head start. It's doing an outsized share of the emotional heavy lifting. Why would that be true? Because your brain doesn't process financial safety the way a spreadsheet does. A spreadsheet sees $2,000 and thinks, that's not much. You're still nowhere near secure. Your brain sees $2,000 and thinks, I probably won't have to put an emergency on a credit card this month. And that one thought, repeated every single day, is the difference between low-grade chronic stress and actually being able to relax. When you have zero savings, every single unplanned expense gets filtered through crisis mode. Your car needs a $400 repair, and suddenly you're doing mental math about which bill you're going to be late on this month. Your dog needs a $600 vet visit, and you're either putting it on a high-interest credit card or delaying care you know your pet needs. These moments aren't just inconvenient. Research on financial stress consistently shows that this kind of chronic uncertainty affects sleep, focus, and even physical health. Because your nervous system treats financial threat similarly to how it treats physical threat. But the moment you have $1,000 sitting there, untouched, something shifts. That same $400 car repair goes from being a crisis to being annoying. You still don't love paying it. Nobody does. But it doesn't threaten your ability to make rent. It doesn't require a call to a family member or a cash advance with a brutal interest rate attached. It's absorbed, and you move on with your week. Here's where the math gets almost embarrassingly simple compared to how much psychological relief it buys. If you set aside just $50 a week, which for a lot of people is roughly the cost of 2 or 3 takeout meals, you'd have $1,000 saved in 20 weeks. That's less than 5 months. Compare that timeline to the years it might take to build a full 6-month emergency fund, and you start to see why chasing the smaller number first makes so much sense. You're not trying to solve every possible financial disaster in one shot. You're trying to remove the specific kind of stress that comes from having absolutely nothing. This is also where a lot of financial advice quietly fails people. Telling someone who's stressed about money that they need 3 to 6 months of expenses saved can feel so far out of reach that they don't start at all. It's like telling someone who's never run a mile that their first goal should be a marathon. Of course they get discouraged. But telling that same person their first goal is $1,000 feels achievable. And achievable goals actually get pursued, while overwhelming ones get postponed indefinitely. There's another shift that happens once you cross this threshold that doesn't get talked about enough. You start making slightly better decisions under pressure. When you have zero savings and a job that's stressing you out, you tend to stay in situations you shouldn't, because leaving feels too risky without any cushion at all. When you have even $1,000 set aside, you have a little more room to think clearly instead of reactively. You can turn down a shady side gig you don't actually have time for. You can say no to a request from a friend or family member that would stretch you too thin. Small amounts of savings create small amounts of choice, and choice is what reduces stress far more than the dollar amount itself. It's worth being honest about the limits here, too. $1,000 will not save you from a job loss that lasts several months. It will not cover a major medical event or a serious home repair. This isn't a claim that a small emergency fund solves every financial problem, because it doesn't. What it does is interrupt the specific, constant, low-level anxiety that comes from having literally nothing between you and the next unexpected bill. That interruption alone is enough to measurably change how people feel about their entire financial life, even while the bigger problems are still being worked on. Once that first $1,000 is in place, the natural next step is building toward a larger cushion, ideally 3 to 6 months of expenses, and eventually real investments that grow over time. But here's the encouraging part. That first $1,000 tends to build the habit and the confidence that makes the second, much larger goal feel achievable instead of impossible. You've already proven to yourself that you can set money aside and leave it untouched. You've already felt what it's like to face an unexpected expense without panic. That experience becomes the foundation for everything that comes after it. So if you've been putting off saving because 6 months of expenses feels impossibly far away, or if you've felt guilty for not doing more with your money, consider starting smaller than you think you need to. $1,000 isn't a finish line, and it was never meant to be one. But it might be the single most efficient dollar amount you can save, not because of what it buys, but because of what it takes away. The constant, quiet fear of what happens if something goes wrong.